But just maybe just start off with one quick question myself, linking it back to the Minister's conversation this morning with Ginny. We talked about the importance of the existing asset. And of course, there is this balance between investing in new infrastructure and protecting the existing infrastructure. And for some, indeed many businesses, the existing infrastructure is just as important, if not more so. And I just wonder whether both of you might just reflect on how you're dealing with that balance in your plans at the moment. Maybe Fiona, start with what's happening in Scotland.
I think my slide showed the investment hierarchy that we very much want to build into our strategic transport projects review and our infrastructure investment plan. And the importance about our investment plan is it's not just new infrastructure, but it's also not just investment in assets. It's actually investment in policies to encourage behaviour change. When you look back, it's all about supporting that vision about what we want for transport in Scotland and how we want to deliver towards our economic strategy. So yes, absolutely making best use of our assets. If you think of some of our more vulnerable areas, remote areas, they just want a reliable transport service. That we have parts of roads that are, just reflecting on what a New Zealand colleague said, parts of the road that are vulnerable when there's certain weather elements, our ferry networks, for example. So yeah, making sure that we have transport available is absolutely our first priority.
I think asset management is really key, and I think what's interesting is that in the major road funding, part of that funding can be for significant maintenance. So there's a new part of that £3.5 billion can be spent on significant schemes. If you look at the rail programme going forward, significant amount of that actually is renewals. So I think you can see that. I think there's a really important work that Matthew touched on in the previous session. We just need to get, we need to tie our shoelaces. But what we shouldn't do is miss the opportunity of creating massive investment, because actually that growth of the economy means that more taxes will be taken, which means we can put more back into the roads anyway. So I think it's a win-win for everybody as we go forward.
In terms of, we've had a bit of a giggle today, haven't we, really, about where's the north? Is it the true north, the actual north? I find it really quite interesting that we have a speaker on the stage from Transport for Scotland, which is indeed north, and yet we have transport for the north. So it's just a little bit of curiosity for me that there's no distinction here between, we've got Transport for Scotland, but we haven't got, why isn't it Northern England? We've got Transport for Wales, I'm from Wales. So I just want to put that out there really, because there seems to be a little bit of a splitting up in terms of transportation in the UK. And I don't know if that's on purpose or whatever, but there we go. My other thing is, this morning somebody mentioned about how Lloyd George said it was quicker to get from North Wales to London than it is to Cardiff. Well, still like that. What is really interesting to me, really, is how both speakers on the stage just now, the Scotland model, you're involving all of your stakeholders, including local authorities, within your discussions in terms of your strategic plan. We had a little bit of a discussion before about the final mile of any journey being absolutely as important as the rest of it. But I don't know if I've got it wrong in terms of transport for the north, that you're looking at the main feeder routes as opposed to the final mile. I just wonder if either of you or both of you could comment on that.
Transport for Scotland does what it says on the tin because it's a country, so I think there's a natural geography there. We were given it, whether some people consider themselves northerners or not, but it's the north of England, but tone would be cool then, doesn't really feel, So I don't think it matters because, we meet on a regular basis. We shared our plans with Transport for Scotland, our strategic development corridors, make sure they link in with the Borders Initiative. It's a network. Ultimately, the last thing we want to do is create another series of invisible borders. So I think it's just a name on the tin. It works. It's enough to get 20 leaders and 11 left chairs to get behind it. I think that's really important. I think it was my mistake not to mention the final mile. It was something that came out in our consultation document, and if you do want to read it, you'll see that there's a lot more emphasis about linking in with local plans to make sure that it is a door-to-door journey and that our pan-northern work links in with that intra-urban and rural travel.
I think Peter described the geographical aspect well, but I'll just touch on the last mile. So in terms of our strategy, yep, absolutely, it's a strategy for everyone. But then when we talking about our strategic transport projects review, so these are strategic projects, so these are national projects, and when you think about infrastructure, absolutely they're for us to deliver, but no, there'll be strategic projects which are for our partners to deliver, and they maybe seem like more localised projects, but actually we need to take a national view on how collectively we're going to tackle some of those last mile issues, and that will be part of SDPR.
And of course, both of you in your areas, you've got quite a mix between cities, urban areas, and actually quite rural areas. So when we're talking about that first mile, last mile, it actually may be much further than just a mile. Yeah. And again, I just wonder, very topical, debate about the ability to provide services in more rural areas, whether you might just want to reflect upon how you're dealing with some of those challenges, because they are quite significant but fundamental for the survival of rural communities. One
of my colleagues was speaking to our Convention of Highlands and Islands earlier on this week, and one of their aspirations is to be able to have a working day. Some of the video of the little girl, a working day in the central belt of Scotland, which isn't possible for many areas in the Highlands and Islands at the moment, so that kind of 9 to 5 day in the central belt. I mean, I can essentially do that in London from Glasgow, but obviously you couldn't do it from certain parts of our geography. But really it's about, what do we want for those areas? Do we want them to become commuting areas? I think it's about understanding the needs and what those areas want and how they can contribute.
And presumably, Peter, that also reinforces your point about the fact it's not just about transport, it's the broader economy, it's the social side of life.
Yeah, very much so. So, for example, just the smart and integrated ticketing will transform the way that people will visit the national parks, because you will be able to get a train there and you'll have tapped on, you might be able to pick up, there's an opportunity then for the market to do ride at the other end, you'll just tap on, tap off again. I think the key thing is that if you look at the sort of our genesis, it was originally the 6 core cities in the north that got together. But actually, Cumbria and North Yorkshire and Northumberland and various other places like that have actually done really, really well out of coming together and the north being as one. And some of that was reflected in the fact that, one of the early MRN wins was announced was Griesbeck. And the work was done by Cumbria, but it had a stronger voice by being part of the Transport for the North family. And I think that's crucial in terms of transforming the way we do business.
What you presented really was a transport plan for the south of the north. And I've felt that all along. It's very much an M62 corridor type model, and there's very little north of that. Tied in with that is the emphasis on HS2, which might not yet happen, and if it does, it's going to be a long way off. And I do feel there's a bigger need for better general infrastructure, which is going to help the north, of course, such as things like having four rail lines from the north to London, which gives you freight connections, which you've mentioned yourself, as well as the fast passenger lines. And that doesn't exist at the moment. I don't know if it exists on the Crewe line, but there's also the West of England one as well. But it's, as far as the north's concerned, it's mainly the east coast link, isn't it? So I just wonder whether the emphasis is right, and there ought to be more emphasis on slightly shorter term policies, which are more likely to happen.
So surprisingly, I don't agree with you. So if you look at our plans, the way we've done the strategic development corridors is to ensure that east-west connection between Cumbria and Northumberland and the northeast is there. We've ensured that those connections across, well, I would say, the A59 corridor, that we've got interventions in the list that we will do there. You're right that MPR does link the 6 cities, but actually there are benefits. So it's a pet hate of mine, really, is because what happens is that people say the interventions in this location, that's what they benefit. It's not. It's a network. So actually, we were chatting with Erin before, the solution to some of Newcastle's problems is that we need to free up the capacity around Leeds. So the fact is that if NPR goes in, the impact it has on the rest of the network across the north means there are benefits to Cumbria, there are benefits to the northeast, there are benefits to North Yorkshire. So there's a danger that we concentrate. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to move away and show the benefits of influence, to show that actually something in this geography actually benefits this corridor, because very few people just go through it. So you're opening up junctions and log jams. So I do disagree with you. Some of our most highly paid people live on the Cumbrian coast. One of the problems that we're going to have is that there's an industry there that doesn't link very well to the East Coast, which has got its wind energy. So how do we start to bring and allow those people to commute and travel and do business together? And I think if we'd got it wrong, then the LEP areas in the north would not have supported the plan. The political leaders of the north would not have supported the plan. So it might seem very Central Belt focused, but I can assure you, and if you have a look at the Strategic Development Corridor work, there are cost-benefit analysis for each of those corridors, which is well above 1, and you'll start to see those benefits quicker in some rural areas than you will the big cities.
And we also get criticised for being Central Belt focused, and I think it's as soon as you start to put things on a plan, people think it's perhaps not for them. So it's just us as an industry to be able to articulate better what this plan is going to take us towards achieving, and we understand the direction we want to go in, where we want to get to, and how this will contribute to it, and we articulate those benefits. It's not a case of a line in a plan is not for you because you can't see yourself ever using that.
We're heading towards a spending review later this year, and I think actually going back to the advocacy role, we collectively as a profession need to make the strongest possible case as to why investment in infrastructure and services, both capital and revenue, is going to be fundamental to the economic success moving forward. And I think the more we can coalesce around that single core message, the more chance we've got of trying to get that progress with the Treasury as we move forward into the spending review. John, one last question from you.
Comment to Fiona. I note there was a slide there of Caledonian ferries. I just wonder if the Minister had been in contact with any commissioning skills that Transport for Scotland might have. But more substantively, I think it's fascinating, and we can't underestimate the comment that Peter has said about the way in which the landscape has changed over the last decade. And the fact that part of the problem is transport is in our title and we're all transport people. So we're immediately thinking an extra lane on motorways, let's go back to some scheme way back in the day. And instead, I think we do need to look to our to the regional economies and create a narrative and create a platform around those regional economies that actually makes sense in terms of the dynamic into those core cities, across those core cities. But I'm really pleased how the Transport for the North plan has continued to evolve. So it does talk about those local routes, like the Calder Valley route, that's absolutely as vital to the Calder Valley as the main fast whiz-bang thing that's going to go from Liverpool to Hull and to Newcastle. But I think there's a more general issue that has got to sit with the Secretary of State, whoever that may be in weeks, months to come. And that is these outlying areas, and you've touched, and it's brilliant to hear talk of Workington, Barrow, but also Dawlish and places on the extremities, because we're not well connected, and people do look enviously. And I've been in fora where people will knock Transport for the North, or they'll knock England's economic heartland. And I think what we do need to do is take that analogy of a 4-engined plane and actually consider the fact that we all need to be aligned far better, and we shouldn't actually just go back to some fixed point that might have been relevant in the past, and instead think of Gracie in Sheffield about when she is going to be Prime Minister. I'd certainly vote for her.
Any final reflections, Fiona?
No, I think just reiterating the point about, we want this, where is it we want to get to, and let's not just revisit policies of the past. That's certainly what we're trying to do.
And Peter?
So I think it's more devolution. I mean, look at the success Scotland has made since devolved government, Transport for Wales, and we work very closely with them. I think the more devolution we get, get more regional funding allocation so that we can actually start to develop schemes and we get that pipeline going forward. And, you know, the Metro mayors have air quality against which they'll be held personally responsible, and they want the powers to affect that, and some of that is because of Highways England roads. So we cannot treat these owners of assets separately. It needs to be treated as a whole, and I think this is where subnational transport bodies can add value to that bigger question and bigger answer.